Hey, what's up, everyone, and welcome. Today, we are going to talk about some pretty cool stuff. Let's get into it. So, picture this. It is 1942. We are in occupied France, and the Gestapo, which is, the notoriously ruthless secret police of Nazi Germany, they are circulating this wanted poster.
Right, and it's not exactly your standard bulletin either.
No, not at all. There is no confirmed name on it. There's no clear photograph. It's really just a physical description. And this incredibly severe warning. They're calling this completely unknown woman the most dangerous of all Allied spies.
Yeah, they were demanding she be found and destroyed, which is intense. But the most prominent identifying characteristic on that poster, the thing that really stood out, was just a single detail. She had a wooden leg and walked with a limp.
Wow.
The Gestapo was literally turning an entire country upside down for a woman they just called the limping lady. I mean, they were absolutely terrified of her. And the crazy part, they never caught her.
It's just wild. So our mission today is to really understand the mechanics of how that happened. We are doing a deep dive into a single biographical source detailing the life of Virginia Hall. We're going to unpack how an American woman who was officially rejected by her own government for a physical disability ended up engineering one of the most lethal resistance operations of World War II.
Exactly. And to understand how she dismantled the Nazi war machine, you really have to look at the bureaucratic machine that initially tried to keep her out of service. So Virginia Hall was born in 1906.
Okay.
She was born into a wealthy family in Baltimore, so she had a highly privileged upbringing, right? She studied in Europe. She spoke multiple languages completely fluently. By her 20s, she was already working as a clerk in American consulates across the continent.
Oh, wow. So she was already in that world.
Right. Her sole ambition in life was to secure a career as a diplomat in the U.S. Foreign Service.
And honestly, she had the perfect resume for it. But then we hit this massive pivot point in 1933. She is on a hunting trip in Turkey. Her shotgun slips, it discharges into her left leg, and gangrene sets in.
Yeah, which is terrifying.
For context, for everyone listening, think about medical science in 1933. This is before widespread antibiotics. So gangrene wasn't just a severe infection. It was a fast-moving death sentence if you didn't act radically.
Yeah.
Doctors had to amputate her left leg below the knee just to save her life.
The physical trauma alone would have completely derailed most people's lives. I mean, understandably. But her psychological response is incredibly telling. She gets fitted with a heavy wooden prosthetic.
Oh, and it wasn't like the ones today, right?
Not at all. This isn't modern carbon fiber. This is a cumbersome, friction-heavy piece of 1930s engineering. It was heavy. And rather than letting it define her as a victim, she names it Cuthbert.
I love that so much. Naming her amputated limb is such a fascinating defense mechanism. It takes this horrific tragedy and turns it into a companion, almost like a joke.
Yeah, she took its power away. But the U.S. Foreign Service definitely wasn't laughing. Under their rules at the time, a physical disability, especially an amputation, was strictly disqualifying.
Which is just so frustrating.
Right. But she applied anyway. She applied multiple times over the following years. She had this exemplary record. She spoke the languages. She possessed all this on-the-ground cultural experience that most diplomats would absolutely kill for.
Yes.
And yet she was repeatedly rejected solely because of the missing leg.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because this type of institutional blindness feels incredibly relevant to anyone listening today who has ever dealt with corporate hiring.
Oh, absolutely.
It is so much like a modern algorithmic filter in human resources, right? You have a candidate with the perfect resume. They have the exact life experience your organization desperately needs. But there's this rigid, binary, on-paper rule that just boxes them out entirely.
Yeah, the system couldn't see the multilingual expert. It could only see the missing limb. What's fascinating here is that those rigid bureaucratic rejections actually forged the exact resilience she would need later.
Right.
The bureaucracy basically told her she was fundamentally unsuited for international service. But when World War II broke out, those peacetime rules stopped mattering. So in 1940, as the German army is advancing on Paris, she doesn't flee back to the safety of Maryland.
Which most people would have done.
Right. Instead, she stays in Paris and volunteers as an ambulance driver.
I really want you to imagine being in her position for a second. You are working the heavy clutch of a 1940s military ambulance. With a wooden leg. You are physically pulling wounded soldiers from the front lines while artillery is falling and the whole country is just collapsing around you.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
That isn't just bravery. That is a profound level of physical endurance.
It really is. And when France finally surrenders to Germany, she manages to make her way to Britain. Now, this is where the sheer chaos of war creates a unique opening for her. She gets noticed by the newly formed Special Operations Executive, or the SOE.
Right, the British intelligence agency.
Exactly. Famously created by Winston Churchill to, set Europe ablaze by supporting resistance movements in occupied territories. And they looked at Virginia Hall and recognized what the U.S. State Department had totally missed.
They saw the potential.
They didn't see a liability. They saw a woman with flawless French, intimate geographical knowledge, and just raw nerve.
So in 1941, the British sent her right back into Vichy France. And for those trying to picture the map, Vichy France was the southern zone of the country. It was unoccupied by the German army at that specific time, but it was run by a French government that was completely subservient to the Nazis.
Yeah, a puppet state, basically.
Exactly. And her cover was posing as a journalist for the New York Post.
Which was a brilliant cover, honestly, because a journalist has a totally legitimate reason to be asking questions, right? Moving around, talking to strangers. But her actual mission was to build an underground resistance network from scratch. And she operated almost entirely alone for over a year.
Okay, I really want to pause and dig into the mechanics here.
Yeah.
Because history books often just gloss over this with phrases like, she built a network.
Right, like it's easy.
Yeah. How does one woman, dropped into a paranoid police state where neighbors are literally turning each other in, actually do that? You can't just walk into a local cafe and ask, hey, who here hates the Nazis?
Definitely not.
So how do you vet locals without exposing yourself to an informant?
Well, it requires a masterclass in information management and psychological profiling. She would observe people for weeks before ever making contact. She looked for really subtle signs of defiance.
Like what?
Like a shopkeeper giving extra rations to a known sympathizer, or maybe a local official turning a blind eye to curfew violations. And when she did finally recruit someone, she utilized a rigid cell structure.
Ah. So this is where compartmentalization comes in. I like to think of this like a submarine with blast doors, right? If the submarine hits a mine and the hull breaches, you seal the blast doors so only one compartment floods, and that keeps the rest of the ship afloat.
That is the perfect analogy for it. She built independent cells of resistance fighters who didn't even know the identities of the people in the other cells. She used what are called cutouts, basically intermediaries who pass messages between two people who never actually meet face to face.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah, because if the Gestapo captured one fighter, they could torture that person all they wanted, but the fighter literally didn't have the information to give up the whole network. Only Hall held all the strings.
So she's arranging safe houses for Allied airmen who have been shot down. She's coordinating parachute drops, orchestrating prison breaks.
Yeah.
And she's doing all of this while remaining a complete mystery to the very people she's actively fighting.
Exactly. And that level of operational security is exactly what drew the attention of Klaus Barbie, the Gestapo officer known as the Butcher of Lyon.
He was a monster.
He was remarkably brutal, and his intelligence reports started showing a pattern. German counterintelligence just couldn't fathom that this widespread sabotage was the work of one person, let alone an American amputee.
Right.
They assumed she had to be the absolute linchpin of the entire French resistance in the region. Capturing her became his personal obsession.
Because she was so effective at building these networks, she eventually forced the Germans to respond. Which brings us to late 1942. Germany decides to fully occupy the southern zone of France. So that Vichy safe haven, it evaporates overnight.
Complete chaos.
The Gestapo pressure is now everywhere, and it's collapsing her network. Safe houses are raided, contacts disappear, capture becomes a mathematical certainty if she stays.
Yeah, she has to escape. But the ports and trains are completely locked down. The only route left open is south on foot over the Pyrenees Mountains into neutral Spain.
Wow.
And this is in the dead of winter.
Just think about how exhausting it is for you to hike in heavy snow on a normal day. Now add a 15-pound wooden block attached to your knee. The friction, the blisters, the physical exhaustion of dragging that weight through freezing steep mountain passes while dodging border patrols.
The physical toll was excruciating. And yet, right in the middle of this harrowing life-or-death escape, we get this moment of dark, almost unbelievable wartime comedy regarding a telegram.
Oh my gosh, this is wild. So she manages to get a clandestine radio message back to SOE headquarters in London. She tells them that she is really struggling on the mountain and that Cuthbert is giving her a lot of trouble.
Right. And London, entirely forgetting that Cuthbert is the nickname for her wooden leg, sends back this deadpan, highly classified reply. They tell her that if this Cuthbert character is being troublesome, she is authorized to eliminate him.
They ordered her to assassinate her own prosthetic leg. It is absurd, but I think it really highlights the extreme isolation she was operating in. The people directing her from afar couldn't even picture her reality.
They had no idea.
But she survives the crossing. She actually makes it to Spain. She is exhausted, her cover in France is completely blown, and the Gestapo knows her physical description perfectly.
Which is bad. And this raises an important question for anyone studying her psychology. Why would someone who has survived all of that, someone who has literally dragged themselves over a frozen mountain range to safety, decide that what they really want to do is go back?
Most rational people would say, I've done my part, give me a desk in London, I'm out.
Exactly. But she felt the job wasn't finished. The problem was the British SOE absolutely refused to send her back. They deemed it a suicide mission. Her limp, her height, her features, they were just too well known to German intelligence.
But if the British wouldn't send her, she was determined to find an agency that would. So in 1944, she switches allegiances to America's newly formed intelligence service, the Office of Strategic Services, or the OSS.
Yeah, the wartime predecessor to the CIA.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting. This is the absolute climax of her spycraft. Returning to France meant she had to completely transform her appearance to evade this massive dragnet that Gestapo had out for her. And the psychology behind her disguise is brilliant because it leverages societal biases.
She understood that the Gestapo were looking for a younger, energetic, authoritative woman, so she became the exact opposite. She transformed herself into an elderly milkmaid.
The physical commitment to this disguise was intense. She dyes her hair gray. She gets a makeup artist to teach her how to draw realistic wrinkles on her face.
Yeah.
But the most crucial part is how she handled her leg. To hide her distinctive limp, the very thing she was famous for, she deliberately altered her entire gait. She taught herself to walk with a wide, shuffling step. She trained her body to move like a tired farmhand whose joints were just worn out from decades of manual labor.
It's incredible. She went into the French countryside and literally hid in plain sight. She tended goats, she shoveled manure, and she even sold cheese to the very German soldiers who were hunting her.
It is the ultimate social invisibility.
Yeah.
Think about it. Who pays attention to an old woman shoveling manure? Nobody looks twice. Society just edits older working-class women out of the picture.
They become part of the background.
Exactly. She weaponized that invisibility. It was the perfect camouflage for a master saboteur. Because while she was milking those goats, she was secretly directing one of the most lethal operations leading up to the D-Day invasion in June 1944.
Yeah, her primary role during this period was coordinating weapon drops to arm the resistance, which meant she had to handle clandestine radio communication, which was arguably the most dangerous job in the entire war, because the Germans utilized what were called goniometry vans.
Okay, let's explain how those worked, because it's a fascinating technological cat-and-mouse game. Imagine two German vans driving around the countryside, right? Each one is equipped with a large, directional antenna. When Hall starts transmitting her Morse code to London, Van A picks up the signal and draws a line on a map showing the direction it's coming from. Then Van B does the same thing from a different location. Where those two lines cross on the map, that's triangulation. That is exactly where the radio is.
Spot on. And the moment she pressed that transmission key, a countdown started. She had perhaps 20 minutes, tops, before those vans would pinpoint her location and soldiers would kick the door in.
That is so stressful.
It was incredibly dangerous. So the mechanics of her operation involved transmitting rapidly, breaking the heavy radio down, packing it into a suitcase, and physically moving to a different barn or attic miles away. And she's doing all of this while maintaining her shuffling, elderly milkmaid persona in public.
And the information she was transmitting under that kind of pressure was vital. She was mapping out specific, hidden drop zones in the countryside. She'd send the coordinates, and under the cover of darkness, Allied planes would fly in low and parachute tons of weapons, explosives, and supplies.
Government reports estimate her networks equipped thousands of French resistance fighters. Thousands. She evolved from being an intelligence gatherer to acting as a quartermaster and a tactician for a secret guerrilla army. She really organized these fighters into cohesive units.
So she isn't just handing out rifles, right? She is directing highly coordinated sabotage. And this is crucial for the D-Day landings. The Allies needed to prevent German panzer divisions from rushing to the beaches of Normandy. So Hall's fighters were specifically targeting German supply lines and infrastructure to paralyze them.
The tactics were just ruthless and incredibly effective. They blew up train tracks, they destroyed bridges, they severed telegraph and telephone lines.
Which is huge. Every train derailed meant troops and tanks that couldn't reach the Allied forces on the coast.
Exactly. And by cutting the phone lines, she forced the German commanders to communicate via radio instead, which Allied intelligence could then intercept and decode.
The cascading effects of that sabotage are staggering. She is systematically crippling the Nazi military's ability to move and communicate in her sector, inflicting massive damage, all while playing the part of a harmless old woman selling goat cheese to the enemy. It is poetic justice on an unbelievable scale.
It really is. And she survived the war, having achieved everything she set out to do. Her network was instrumental in the liberation of France. But the post-war phase of her life reveals a deeply frustrating reality about how society often deals with exceptional people once a crisis ends.
Right, because the war ends, and in 1945, she is awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. For context, that is the second highest military decoration of the United States Army. At the time, she was the only civilian woman to receive it in the entire war.
That's a massive honor.
It is. But the source material notes she requested a small, private ceremony with no press, stating she was still operational and wanted to stay under the radar.
That humility speaks volumes about her character, honestly. But in 1947, she joins the newly formed CIA, which was the successor to the OSS. Now, you would logically assume that an intelligence agency would treat one of the most proven, elite field operatives in history as a highly prized asset, right? Utilizing her expertise to train the next generation or run top-tier operations.
So what does this all mean for Virginia Hall? Well, it means the crisis ended, and the old bureaucratic norms snapped right back into place. Despite an unparalleled resume, surviving the Gestapo, crossing the Pyrenees on a wooden leg, arming thousands of fighters, the CIA basically relegated her to a desk job for the rest of her career.
It's awful. The agency was steeped in the intense gender biases of the 1950s and 60s, and they simply wasn't willing to put a woman in high-level operational field positions or management. The same institutional blindness that rejected her in the 1930s for her physical disability was now marginalizing her in the 1950s for her gender.
It is maddening to think about. She was essentially pushing papers. She retired in 1966 and passed away in 1982, having spent decades largely unrecognized by the general public for what she had actually done. It's really only been in recent years that the full scope of her operations has been declassified, and her story has broken out into the wider cultural consciousness.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Virginia Hall's life proves something fundamental. The people who actually change the course of history are rarely the ones who fit the perfect mold or check all the boxes on an application.
Right.
Often they are the exact ones society overlooks or underestimates. She took every disadvantage, her amputation, her gender, her perceived age, and engineered them into lethal tactical advantages. The Gestapo couldn't catch her precisely because they couldn't comprehend someone like her being capable of such destruction.
Which leaves us with a really provocative final thought to mull over. We spent a lot of time today analyzing the cruelty of that initial rejection from the U.S. Foreign Service back in the 1930s. But what if they hadn't rejected her? What if they had looked at her application, ignored the wooden leg, and accepted her into the diplomatic corps?
The entire timeline shifts dramatically.
She would have achieved her dream, absolutely.
No.
But she likely would have spent World War II safely pushing papers in some embassy in Switzerland or South America, miles away from the fighting. She would have been comfortable and safe. But the world would have lost one of its greatest saboteurs.
Yeah.
The German response to D-Day might have been much stronger without her resistance networks paralyzing their reinforcements. It really forces you to realize that sometimes the most unfair, devastating rejections you face in life, the ones that feel like you've hit a total dead end, are exactly the mechanisms that position you for your true purpose. Her greatest setback was the exact catalyst required for her legend. Thank you so much for joining, and remember, if you've made it this far, hit that like and subscribe so you can catch the next one. Stay safe and keep learning.